My name is Stewart MacGlashan, and I'm here today to do a presentation on the history of Killiecrankie School on behalf of the soldiers of Killiecrankie. We do presentations on different aspects of life in this community throughout history, and there are many other interesting videos on different themes covering different ages, and I hope you'll take the time to have a look at some of those on Facebook. Our cameraman today is that old soldier of Killiecrankie stalwart, James Rattery. The village of Killiecrankie has stood here for several centuries, but it was only relatively recently that it became known by that name. The original name was Aldgurnig, and that's from the Gaelic Altgurnig, which means noisy burn, and that's the name of the stream that runs through the village. When the Highland Railway opened their new station in 1865, they, instead of calling the station Aldgurnig after the village as was normal, they instead called it after the pass, so they called the station Killiecrankie. The school continued to be known as Aldgurnig School right up until the outbreak of the Second World War, and from that time on it appears to have been referred to as Killiecrankie School. A little bit of a background history of the school. Killiecrankie is in the parish of Moulin, and there's been a parochial school in Moulin from at least the 17th century. In 1790, several schools in the area were recorded teaching both Gaelic and English, and around this time the Society for the Propagation of Christian Knowledge was set up to, and I quote, "increase the means of Christian knowledge and education in Scotland." But this was mainly at the Highlands and Islands, and the General Assembly Committee, which was another church committee with similar aims, was set up sometime in the mid-19th century, and this covered not just the Highlands and Islands but the whole of Scotland. These bodies started to have less influence after the Education Act of Scotland introduced school boards. A non-parochial school was established at Aldgurnig in 1837, connected with Tenandry Church Parish Church, which was built the previous year in 1836. And here we are now, we're standing in the graveyard of Tenandry Church. So basically what that meant was that the people who lived a long way from the parish church at Moulin had sometimes it's called a chapel of ease. They built a church closer to the people where they could worship without having to travel all day to get there and back. So the church has, throughout its life, has been strongly linked to the school. When they set up the church, then they had to set up a school. Okay, we'll now take a short trip down the hill from Tenandry Church down to the village, and see if we can take a look inside the school building to get an idea of what the classroom looked like in past times.
So this is where your grandfather was born?
It was. He was a carter.
A carter?
Yeah.
And he was born here?
1874.
Oh, 1874.
And I think he maybe worked for the marshals. They were carters, coal merchants. You don't really get any shot of the school from here anymore because the trees are blocking it out. Used to watch all the quarry lorries climbing up this hill. Some of them could barely make it, the old Leylands and Bedfords. A very busy quarry. In the station too, I mean, they used to load up trucks with lime to go all over the country. There's trucks would come out continuously. The school building we see today was extensively altered over the years and is now a private house, looking much the same as it did when I was a pupil between 1952 and 1959. Throughout most of its history, Killiecrankie School would normally have only one teacher, with assistance in the earlier years of a part-time sewing mistress for the girls. There was a lean-to there which was the cloakroom and nothing else, but then they built this new extension, and that was flushing toilets, which was a completely new experience for many of us.
Because you didn't have them at home.
Didn't have them at home, not in our home anyway.
So you used to come along the path and then in through the door here.
In through the door there, yeah. So here we are now, we're inside the original school building in Killiecrankie, and this is now a private house, but it's still recognisable as the old school. This was the classroom, as the same as it was. There used to be a folding partition here, dividing this from a similar sized area next door, which was used in my time as the dining room, and where we sang endless hymns every day in life, it seemed to me. Our teacher was very fond of singing, I wasn't. So we'll start by taking a look at the conditions in the school and how they've changed over the years. If the first pupils could have travelled forward 100 years to the mid-1950s, they would have found that the school facilities had changed very little. The most significant improvement over that period was the new upper storey added to the schoolhouse in 1904. And from being a single storey building, it was now expanded so that there was room not only for the schoolmaster but for his family too. And the school also, it was reconfigured to give you the tall building that it is today. Electric lighting was only installed as late as 1949, and the next significant improvement was during my own spell here in 1957, and a new extension, which included kitchen facilities which we didn't have before, a cloakroom and flushing toilets, which replaced the previous latrine blocks, which had no running water as such, although they could be flushed with a bucket, as they were every night, a bucket of water. They were converted into a bicycle shed and a storehouse. Initially, we find there was no dedicated play area attached to the school, and this resulted in regular complaints from the villagers of boys playing football in the road and the farmers' fields and creating slides on the brae outside. And the teacher noted the need for a playground in 1878 and also in 1879, and the adjoining land was eventually acquired for the playground adjacent to the school. And though in 1915 it was noted that there was still no shelter in the playground for the children. The old wooden van, which was what we called the play shed, was very popular, and it appears to have been a former railway wagon, which might well have been recovered from a serious derailment which had happened here in the late 1890s. And this was replaced eventually by a much less interesting corrugated iron shelter, which is, we can see the remains of that today. We also mourned the loss of our, what we call the big tree, which was a large oak tree, and it can be seen in all the photographs. So the large oak tree which we spoke about before, it stood right here. Every school photograph right back into the middle 1800s onwards, the oak tree is there, and it changes very little over the years, right up until the time it was chopped down in 1957. Beneath its commodious shade, disputes were settled and playground parliaments were held to decide what game was to be played that day. It might be football, cowboys and Indians, cops and robbers, Tommies and Jerrys, and it was all played conveniently out of sight from the teacher. And the tree also provided twigs, which we fashioned into makeshift pistols for games of cowboys or rifles to shoot Jerrys with. The girls played independently at their own games. That would be skipping or houses and things like that, and very rarely did we play together. One game we did play together was hide and seek, and the big tree would be the den, and we'd build shelters with branches from the trees in the wood. So it was a big loss, we felt, when we come back after the summer holidays in 1957 to find that the old play shed and the big tree had gone forever. In an early entry in the new logbook, the teacher describes how he had to march the younger children up and down the classroom to combat the intense cold in the winter. And complaints about heating, in fact, was a recurring theme throughout the school's history, and there was reports of ink freezing in the ink wells. They couldn't do any writing because the ink was frozen, and children were kept off school because, to quote from the logbook, intense cold in the building and school like an ice house and so on. And what I'm told is that in these days the children would each bring a lump of peat into school each morning for the fire. There was a small fireplace in the corner which was supposed to heat the whole school, but failed miserably. The first school logbook was introduced in February 1864 and provides us with a continuous history of everyday life, typical of a small highland village school, I suppose. From that period almost continuously through to when the school closed in 1992. So as well as recording the day-to-day progress of the pupils, attendances and the expansion and eventual decline of the school roll, it gives a valuable insight into the lives of the children and teachers and the challenges they had to face. It is also an excellent reflection on how the school slowly developed over the years through incremental improvements in conditions alongside the continuous evolvement of the Scottish education system. Water coming on. Okay, we better get ourselves sorted out here. So we'll start by taking a look at the conditions in the school and how they changed over the years. We're not in Killiecrankie School, but we've moved up the road to Blair Athol, and we're in the building which used to be the Blair Athol School and is now the Athol Country Life Museum. But I'm standing in the school section because it would be very similar to the furniture that they would have in Killiecrankie School, notably the teacher's desk here, or the master's desk, his high chair, and in front of me here is solid oak desk. The desks in Killiecrankie, when I started there, they were very similar to this. They had a little shelf underneath. Oh, that one has two. So they were pretty much the same as that. The only difference, I would say, there would be two wooden seats, and they would hinge up the way. So when you stood up to say the Lord's Prayer every morning, they would fold up. By the size of it, this would be for the smallest infants. And on the desk, we've got blackboards and with chalk, which the children would practice writing their first letters on. These were actually still in use in my first year in primary school. Well, I think they probably disappeared shortly after that. And as I recall, this one's in pristine condition. They must have been well behaved at Blair Athol School, because the ones I recall at Killiecrankie were heavily engraved with the initials of all the pupils that had passed that way over the years. And in 1957 these were thrown out and replaced by lightweight modern desks and chairs. Now this part here, on the short side of the L shape, was the actual schoolhouse where the schoolmaster or schoolmistress would live with their family if they had one. And this was the back door to the schoolhouse. This wooden building here, remarkably, I think it appears in every single photograph there is of the school, right back to the middle 1800s, and it's still standing today. And the only difference is this little part here was the ash pit, where the ash from the coal fire in the peat fire in the school building, and also in the schoolhouse, they would fill the ash pit and empty it out about once a year. At this point we should maybe turn our attention to the actual education of the children. Regular inspections of the premises and the pupils' work was carried out over the years by the Board of Governors, which included at in earlier times the Duchess of Athol, and more significantly the Alston Stewart family of Strathgarry, who were very supportive, and the Butter family, and of course the local ministers, who were regular visitors to the school, who took a great interest in the religious education of the children, which was a very important part of the curriculum at the time. Mrs. Alston Stewart and her daughters frequently visited to quote the logbook, to examine the girls' work, and the minister also called regularly to test the youngsters on religious education. Gradually this responsibility was devolved to the local education board inspectors, who visited to assess the academic achievement. In April 1876 the inspector reported, and I quote here, "Grammar, geography and history well attended, one boy studying Latin and Euclid," which is quite impressive for a tiny village school. New classes were introduced in physical geography for the boys and domestic economy for the girls, so they've started to expand the range of subjects. Later that same year the inspector's report was less favourable, and we quote from the logbook here again, "The offices," and by that they mean the premises, "are in a filthy state, and the approaches to the school are very wet and muddy. The grant should be reduced if there is no improvement." So they were going to be penalised if they didn't get their act together. Another adverse report followed in 1879 along similar lines. However, by 1884, and at this time my own grandfather was a pupil at the school, he would be 10 years old at the time, things were starting to look up, and there were first of a number of favourable reports, and I quote from one of those. "Subjects now include French, Latin, English, maths and physical geography. And the attendance is also improving, and the school roll increases to 50. The following year there's yet another glowing school report, and the school roll is steadily increasing, and it's now at 65, which is far as I can determine, was the most number of pupils to have attended the school. And we even find new pupils being enrolled from Blair Athol and Fincastle. This suggests a growing reputation, but it also seems to have resulted in overcrowding. The master is opening the school 1 hour early, and in his words, to provide extra subjects for those wanting to take them. So over and above the call of duty, you might say. When I was a child, you know, because there was 7 classes being taught, I mean, the way the teacher usually taught was she would spend some time with one class and give them some work to do, and she'd say, right, go on with that work, move on to the next class. If you finished your work quite quickly, which I always did, I used to gaze out this window here, just like it is just now. There's flocks of swallows swooping past. And my eyesight was much better in these days. You could see the golden eagles up in Craigclonbuick there, soaring above the ridge, and buzzards and all kinds of things. And it was, it's another thing that gets imprinted in your memory. There's not many schools. I mean, the windows in schools are usually built a bit higher, so that the pupils aren't distracted by looking outside. And these ones are a little higher than a normal house. But in this one, it didn't really work because you had this marvellous vista to look out upon, and there was always something happening out there. The records of the school rolls reflects fluctuating population of the area over the years. When the school opened in 1837, there were 32 pupils on the roll. By 1876, this had grown quite considerably to 60 pupils, of which 37 were boys and 23 were girls. And that remained fairly steady over the next few decades. In 1885, there was 50 pupils, and towards the end of the year, there was grown to 65, which, as far as I can see, was the largest number in the school. So you can imagine there was this classroom, and presumably where the partition is here, beyond that, there's a similar sized room which would also be a classroom. But as far as I can tell, there was only ever one teacher, although there were occasionally assistants, and there was always a sewing mistress. That was one of the conditions of the grant, that there had to be a sewing mistress in the 1800s. Overcrowding was a serious problem in the late 1800s. In December 1873, this school logbook reports a shortage of desks, and the younger children were sent to the playground while the older group used the desks, and then they would swap over in the afternoon. The staff at the school at the time were one master, plus an assistant, who would be an unqualified person presumably, and a sewing mistress. Multiple classes were taught simultaneously, often with compound classes larger than the modern permitted maximum. And this must have been, this was true throughout the life of the school, one teacher teaching 7 classes, which must have required exceptional skills. In 1915, the school inspector remarked that it was, quote, unfortunate that when the school was reconstructed a few years ago, no provision was made for an increase in numbers. School now overcrowded, and no shelter in the playground for pupils in bad weather. Poor attendances were a perennial problem for the school throughout the 19th century. Although the Education Act required full attendance, this requirement does not appear to have been rigorously enforced at this school. Successive masters continuously fretted over seasonal absences resulting from the older boys being kept off school at busy times such as haymaking, crop planting, potato picking, sheep shearing, and even in one instance in 1885 for oak peeling, which we can only assume meant that they were stripping the bark from oak trees to produce tannin for leather manufacture, which is probably leads us to another story for another time. There are also references in the school logbook to boys taking time off for the feeing at Bullet Market. Effectively, the older boys only attended school during the winter months, when conversely the younger children would be kept off school because of the deep snow and the intense cold inside the building, compounded by long distances to be travelled in the winter conditions. Pupils were reported absent for various other reasons. Most of the older boys would be absent because of farm work in spring and autumn. By the turn of the century, the hitherto tolerant authorities began to enforce the law. In 1877, several parents were issued with a warning that proceedings would be taken against them if they withheld their children from school. And the master himself was issued with a, quote, stern warning in 1901 about long-term absences. So here we are again in the Athol Country Life Museum, which was a former school in Blair Athol, in the classroom. And up on the wall here, we'll just point out the belts that the teachers used to administer discipline, and they administered it very freely in those days. And this one is a traditional belt that was used. It was the worst one to get. It was they were all made in a town called Lochgelly in Fife, and they were known as Lochgelly Tawes. And they were given for sometimes for any minor misdemeanor, for talking in class, for eating a sweetie in class, for being late, for not doing your homework. If administered by a female teacher who would perhaps use a smaller belt, it wasn't so painful, no big deal. If this one was administered by a big burly male teacher, it really hurt. Her hand used to swell up like a balloon. And more often than not, if you got 6 of the belt, I mean, they would miss your hand altogether, and your wrist would be swollen up as well. You couldn't write for the rest of the day. Not that that bothered us. However, our teachers at Killiecrankie School were genteel ladies, and their belt didn't hurt at all. In fact, it was a matter of prestige to get the belt. To give you a lot of street credibility. Regarding discipline in the school, some of the entries in the logbook are evidence. There's a lot of evidence of unacceptable levels of indiscipline among the pupils. For example, I'll just give you a couple of the many examples in the book. In 1876, James Webster was dismissed as, and I quote, "He would not give up drinking and making a mess of the school floor." So he was expelled from school for that, drinking it. He would have been at the very most 12 years old, so the mind boggles. And then the following year, 1877, there's another entry here, and again I quote, "Duncan MacDonald suspended for general bad, indecent and wicked conduct." And this was typical of the entries as far as discipline was concerned. But most alarming of all, again in the same year, 1877, I mean there must have been a bad lot at this time, a boy was suspended for carrying a loaded pistol into school, and it was discovered in the middle of a Bible class lesson, and the school was dispelled immediately while they sorted this out. So that was a very serious offence, and the boy was suspended, and it was later recorded that no further discipline was carried out on him because his father had carried out sufficient discipline at home when he found out. Now, before we move on, I'd like to say a little bit about health and welfare in the area. In earlier times, in Victorian times, we can get a good feel for that from the school logbook. In the early years, medical treatment was rudimentary, and mortality rates, particularly among young children, was quite high. And we see from the school log that epidemics regularly swept through the population, and the school would be closed down. For example, in April and May 1876, the school was closed down for 5 weeks because of a double epidemic of measles and whooping cough. Other epidemics which occurred regularly were smallpox, diphtheria, and each time there was mortalities, particularly among the children. As an example of this, we've moved a few miles north of Killiecrankie, and a good illustration of this is this gravestone here in the churchyard, the kirkyard at Struan. It's the gravestone erected by John Crearer of Dalnameen in memory of 7 of his family. They all died between September and December in 1861 in a 3-month period, and the oldest was 17 years old and the youngest was 6 years old, and the last one to die was the oldest, in fact, and he died on Christmas Eve of 1861. Less serious ailments were also recorded in the school log. For example, in the summer of 1876, the master reports that boy was very ill from, quote, running in the sun too much, and other pupils were warned of the dangers. So there must have been warm spells in that period too. Old school photographs often show children going to school unshod. They wouldn't wear footwear in the summer months, and that happened well into the 20th century, as we can see from the school photos. In 1910, the master reported to the governors that 2 of his pupils were unable to attend school during the winter, and I quote again, because they had no proper footwear. And a little further along, in 1936, interestingly, we see that there's an entry there reporting that a gentleman who was to become a well-known character in the area, farmer, he would become the farmer at Strathgarry, Duncan Scrimgeour, who was a senior boy at the time, had a serious bike accident and was off school for some time. Purely coincidentally, today the farmer at the same farm, Strathgarry Farm, is his son, Murray Scrimgeour, and what do you know, almost 30 years to the day, he appears in the school logbook, and he's reported to have fallen and broken his arm. I've entitled this section High Days and Holidays, and we'll take a look at how the holidays were in the school in the earlier years. There was somewhat different arrangements to what they have in schools now. So school days were not all hard work and strife. There were very often impromptu days off, and they would be arranged at the discretion of the master, and we've got many examples of this in the school log. For example, the older boys would be given days off to go to Mullen Market, Mullen being the nearest market town, and they would go there for what they called the feeing. And that means that when they left school, almost all of them would begin to farm work. It was the biggest employer in the area at the time, and probably still is, and they would meet up with farmers, and they would agree on a wage, and they would be taken on for the farm work. So it was a bit like career advice, if you like. And we've got a few quotes here from the logbook, February 1886, and he's got here, today was a holiday on occasion of Miss Alston Stewart's wedding. Miss Alston Stewart being the daughter of one of the governors. I couldn't see that happening today. And then in March 1893, it says, school closed at lunchtime for the annual ploughing match. They held ploughing matches at Balrobbie Farm, quite close to the school. It was of some interest to the pupils, many would live in farms, so, and no doubt to the master himself, so they would all go along to enjoy the entertainment. Then in May 1910, school closed for what was an important event, the memorial service for the king who had just died, Edward VII. And the memorial service was held at Blair Athol Church. In 19th century Highland Perthshire, Christmas was not widely celebrated. New Year was a much more important holiday. However, there was a 2-week break over the New Year period, so the school would close not before Christmas but after Christmas and before New Year. The first reference to Christmas holidays is recorded in 1913, where the entry reads, school closed for service in Tenandry Kirk, followed by cinematograph entertainment at Old Faskley House. Now this must have been a great novelty and quite surprising in a place like Killiecrankie, because cinematography had only been invented 8 years earlier in France. And so it just shows you in even a remote country village in the Highlands, they were right up to date with their technology. And moving forward to June 1914, just before the outbreak of the First World War, it's noted that the school was closed to celebrate the jubilee of the accession of the Duke of Atholl. He entertained over 200 local children at Blair Castle, followed by entertainment in the Scottish Horse Drill Hall, which today is a village hall in Blair Athol. Towards the end of the First World War, 1918, on the 1st of May, we have an entry that the May Queen was elected, and there was May Day celebrations in the playground, and they were lucky enough to have photographs of that occasion. You know, it wasn't all hard work, as we say. They did have their light-hearted moments too. It appears that the school was largely funded by school fees. That was the parents usually had to pay something towards the education of their children. Although in case of hardship, I mean, the school governors were not always ready to help out where needed, and funding was always also provided by the parish and by the governors, the school governors themselves, that is the local school board, and particularly the Alston Stewart family of Strathgarry. And they were the ones who appear to have also decided the level of pay which the schoolmaster received. So as the 19th century draws to a close, we find that an increasing number of inspections are being carried out by the school board inspectors, who appear to have the power to decide on the annual grants. So if the school was performing well, they would be rewarded by an increased grant, and if they didn't perform so well, the grant was in some cases reduced. Frequently the records give hints of a shortage of cash for much needed improvements. As a small village school, Killiecrankie would likely struggle to compete with the budgets of the schools in larger villages and towns in the area. And we got some evidence of this from the records, and we've got an entry here from 1878 where the teacher made one final telling comment in the logbook when he stated simply, "Resigned today as I had nothing to maintain my family." And I think this teacher left, if my research is correct, he left to go to Lochgelly School, which was another village school at the other side of Lochgelly. So just to give you some idea of the budgets of the schools, the annual grant in 1884 was £51, 2 shillings and sixpence, and in 1886 this had been increased quite considerably, but still only £61, 7 shillings and sixpence. And in 1885 as an example of help that the school governors offered, it says school managers will help to pay for books for some of the poorer children. So they would, if they could afford it, they would buy their own books, and if they couldn't, the families struggled to afford it, then the governors would help out when required. But in 1898 things are improving, and we've got a note here, managers abolish all school fees. Killiecrankie goes to war. So we now move forward in time to the war years. So when the school closed for the summer holidays in 1914, pupils were probably unaware that they would soon be actively engaged in helping the war effort. This would be far from their minds when the school closed for the day on the 16th of June 1914 to celebrate the Duke of Athol's succession to his title. A year later, it is recorded that the boys gathered a large sack of sphagnum moss for dressings to be used in the front line, while the girls sewed muslin bags to be stuffed with the moss to make bandages. In 1918, the school contributed a not inconsiderable sum of £77, 11 and sixpence to a War Weapons Week fundraiser, while the master's wife, Mrs. MacGlashan, organised a bring and buy sale raising 9 guineas, or £9.20, for the Red Cross. At the 1921 prize giving, 3 years after the war ended, an illuminated roll of honour was unveiled by Major Foster of Old Faskley. This consisted of 5 wooden panels with the names of 50 former pupils who had served in the conflict, including 9 who were killed. The names of these 9 were read out aloud during an armistice service at the school on the 11th of the 11th, 1921, or the 3rd anniversary of the end of the war. And the pupils sang, "Our God whose help in ages past," and sold poppies, which raised £6, 2 shillings and sixpence, or £6.25 for the Earl Haig Fund. I think this is at the inception of the fund. We've had a good hard look for this illuminated roll of honour, which is referred to, 5 wooden panels with gold lettering, as I think I was described. And there is no trace of it to be found, but maybe one day it'll be turned up. What we do have is a plaque on the wall that commemorates the names of the 13 who gave their lives. This plaque refers to the people of the parish, or the men of the parish. Now we're up here in Tenandry Kirkyard, and we should maybe mention in the passing that Thomas MacGlashan, who was the longest serving master at Killiecrankie School, was buried here, we think, in this spot, although we're not sure. The gravestone that was here previously has disappeared, but I'm pretty sure it was in this plot here that he was buried. So, war broke out again on the 3rd of September 1939, and the impact was felt in Killiecrankie School less than a week later, when pupils from St Joseph's School from Steps in Glasgow, or outside Glasgow, were evacuated to the area for their safety. And the local children had lessons in the morning, and evacuees were given lessons in the afternoon. So each of the schools, the local school pupils and evacuees from Glasgow, each of them spent only half a day at school. How long this went on for isn't recorded, but I don't imagine it would have lasted very long. And just interestingly, just as in the First World War, it's recorded in the logbook that the children collected moss and made dressings for the frontline troops. So now we'll cover the 1950s, and this is a period with which I'm very familiar because it covers my own time at Killiecrankie School between 1952 and 1959, and I've got fairly vivid memories. The room at the time, and it continued that way through most of its life, it was divided in the middle by a sliding partition. And on one side there was a classroom, and in the classroom you had the open coal fire in the corner, and on the other side of the partition, in my time, at one time it would have been used as an additional classroom, but in my time it served as the dining area. There was 2 collapsible dining tables with benches on either side of them. There was a large glass-fronted library cupboard. Every month the library van would come round and change the books, and you could pick out one book every week on a Friday afternoon as your library book for the week, and you could also choose one book for your parent or parents. It was very popular, being no television or games or videos in these days. Also in the room there was a piano. The particular teacher that I had, Miss Stark, she was particularly fond of singing, and we seemed to spend an inordinate amount of time, at least an hour every morning, singing hymns. I clearly remember my own first day at school. It's forever etched in my mind. The teacher at the time, I only had 1 year with her. She was in her last year before retirement. She seemed very, very old, but she was probably just coming up to 60. She was Miss McBain, and as I remember her, she was a ruddy-faced old lady in a tweed skirt and twin set, and she taught at the school from 1936 to 1953 when she retired. And as far as I can see, she was the very first female teacher at the school. And to a 5-year-old child who had hitherto never experienced anything but kindness from adults, she appeared to be the most fearsome creature I had ever met. I was absolutely terrified of her, particularly when she shouted and screamed abuse at the other children, which she seemed to do constantly. And the school day started with the Lord's Prayer, which we chanted dutifully every morning. Our Father, which art in heaven, didn't mean a thing to us, no idea what the words meant. From the first day I went to school to the last. But this duty had to be carried out as soon as we were assembled at our desks every morning. Now, the first day at school, I joined the class together with another little girl called Sheila Grant, and their mothers took us to school and had a chat with the teachers, and Julie left, and the teacher led us through to the dining area at the other side of the partition, bearing in mind she had 7 classes to teach simultaneously, so she stood us in front of these pictures, which I've got here, not the originals, but excuse the artwork, the ones I've done myself. And the two of us were stood in front of these pictures, letters of the alphabet, accompanying each picture from A to Z, and she would say, repeat after me, A for apple. And we'd say, A for apple. Again, A for apple. Again, A for apple. Next, B for bat. B for bat. B for bat. K for cat. K for cat. Again, K for cat. A for apple, B for bat, K for cat. She said, good. She said, now I'm going back to the classroom. You two stand here and keep repeating A for apple, B for bat, K for cat. And off she went. So Sheila and I stood there and chanted away, A for apple, B for bat. And after a couple of minutes we got tired of this and we stopped. And there was a scream from next door, I can't hear you. And immediately started again, A for apple, B for bat, K for cat. Seemed to go on for the whole morning. But by the end of the morning, by golly, we knew our alphabet and we never forgot it for the rest of our lives. At this period of time, school meals were prepared in the Lochgelly High School kitchens, and these were brought to the school by the local service bus in insulated aluminium containers. These arrived at 12:20, and they were eagerly, by this time lunchtime came, we're all getting a bit hungry and would look out for the bus coming down the hill and drop off the containers. We knew it would nearly be lunchtime, and so we would have our lunch, and then the older boys would take the containers down to the bus stop to wait for the bus returning from Struan down to Perthshire, and they would pick up the containers on the way and take them back to Perthshire High School kitchens. The classes stopped at 3:30, so we saw the bus coming over the hill at 3:25. We knew it was just about time to go, so everything would go back into the desks and we'd make ready to make a sprint for the door. A typical school dinner in these days would be beef stew or roast beef with mashed potatoes. Well, not even mashed potatoes, as I recall it. The potatoes always seemed to be soggy, and they weren't mashed. And there would be cabbage, and sometimes, if you're lucky, carrots. And this would be followed by a dessert, which would almost invariably be some kind of sponge. It would either be a yellow sponge or a grey sponge, or an apple sponge or a Victoria sponge. And it was accompanied by runny custard, very runny custard. It was totally liquid and not very appetizing. In another part of this video we interview Margaret Cairney, who was several years ahead of me at school, so she'll have probably more accurate memories than I have of Miss McBain. You want to recognise the old toilets now, eh?
I know, eh? Do you remember that? Well, you
I do, yeah.
I'll tell you something, I never used them.
No?
I was absolutely terrified.
Really? Why?
Well, you hear the water coming down the...
Uh-huh. I don't know where it all went.
I don't know either. I was afraid in case I fell down and never got...
Yeah.
Do you remember your first day at the school?
I do. I was absolutely terrified.
Was
I
it?
sat right at the very front beside her,
Uh-huh.
along with Christine Beaton.
All right.
Yeah.
Was that the Beatons of Blair Raffle?
Because they must have been up at Farsley at that stage.
Yes. Callum Beaton
Callum.
and Neil Beaton.
Yeah.
Right, that family.
Yeah, and they had a huge, the huge fire at the,
The teacher sat beside the fire,
That's right,
and the rest of us were dying of the cold in winter time.
But it was absolutely frightening.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but of course, what you've got to remember is, I was at home during the war, and I only saw my granny and my granddad and my uncle. So I never met any other people.
Right, okay.
Yeah, until I came to the school.
Right.
And I had to walk from Sherlock.
No,
Yeah.
even at 5 years old.
Yeah. And walk home again. Sometimes the teacher used to chum me along the road.
Oh.
Because I wouldn't go home.
Oh, all right. She would walk you home?
Yeah.
Miss McBain? Oh, that must have been exciting for you.
Now, John Robertson started the next year at the school, so
Oh,
I had a
right.
chum. So the wee shop up here, he had to take the loaves home for his father's piece the next day.
Okay.
And of course we were playing all the way along the road and what from that, and we got hungry, so we ate the loaves.
Wow.
Just with a wee bit. They only had the crust.
Oh dear.
We were in serious trouble.
Oh dear. Did you get the trouble too?
Oh yeah.
You were an accessory to the fact, eh?
Yeah.
Oh dear.
We got fed up carrying the loaves. Really.
It must have been a temptation, I suppose, after a hard day at school.
Yeah. I don't remember getting the belt and put and I was so terrified I was trying to behave myself. No, I don't remember getting it actually.
But you would belt the girls as well as the boys, did you?
Yeah, if they were in trouble, yeah.
What were school meals like?
Well, I thought they were good. Yeah, I quite liked them. I thought they were fine.
Good.
The kids are so fussy now; they'll not eat anything.
Yeah.
But Mrs. Thompson that used to clean the school, she cleaned the school and she was the dinner lady. I don't know when she left, and then my mum took over for her until they got a new cleaner, and then it was Mrs. Mitchell.
Now that's the first one I remember was Mrs. Mitchell.
Okay.
She lived in the railway cottages.
That's right. And then Mrs. Stewart.
Mrs. Stewart, indeed, yeah, she was.
And she was there to the last.
But Mrs. Robertson did it for a bit
That's
too.
right. She did it a wee bit as well. I forgot about her. Yeah.
And they cleaned the school and they lit the fire every morning before we came, and they served up the dinners and they washed the dishes afterwards.
Yeah, because here's the dinners that came from Lochgelly School.
Yes.
And arrived by the bus.
Uh-huh.
All the leftovers were given to Mrs. Fife at Woodbine Cottage.
Okay, which one's Woodbine Cottage
Where the
now?
hall is. Hall.
All right, it's demolished
It's
now.
demolished.
Then. Ah, I see, right.
For our hens.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then Mrs. Wright then got it after she moved house.
Next door to
That's
that.
right. Oh, football?
Really?
Yeah.
Girls played the football?
Yeah.
Well, you're ahead of your time then.
Yeah, football and hide and seek. Yeah. Lots of things. Yeah. We all played together. Yeah. When things were getting hot in the school, Miss McBain used to rush out the door, screaming.
Really?
And then she'd come round the back and have a look in the window to see
Did
what
she?
we were doing.
The wee window at the back?
Yeah. But you know, everybody was terrified of
Including
her.
yourself?
Oh God, I was terrified.
Oh well, I wasn't alone then.
Yeah. Even my sisters as well. But she was a really quite a nice person, really, after you
once you got
left
to
the
know
school.
her.
Yeah. She had a terrible job to do.
Teaching 7 classes all at the same time.
Too much. It's too much for her.
Crazy. They wouldn't allow it nowadays.
No, they wouldn't allow it.
And what was your greatest moment at the school? What did you enjoy most?
Leading at 12. to go to Pitlochry, but that was just about as bad.
Oh, yeah.
And how did you get to Pitlochry?
Train. On the train.
Yeah.
I stayed till I was 15 and then I went to Aberfeldy.
Oh, you went to Aberfeldy too? Clever clogs, eh?
I wasn't clever, but I didn't like Aberfeldy because I went to stay there.
In the hostel?
In the hostel, yeah.
It's probably worth mentioning a few of the teachers who taught here over the years, and there was quite a number. In the earlier years, the teachers were always male, and in the later years, they appeared to be always female. So one of the most prominent teachers that taught here was Thomas MacGlashan. He was the longest serving teacher from about 1878 up until the late 1920s. Others included Mr. Fairbairn, and Andrew Kellock was a a notable teacher. I think he started his career at this school, and then he moved on to Blair Athol School, which was probably a promotion, being a bigger school and no doubt a bigger remuneration. In later years, the time I was at school, I was taught in the primary one at least by Miss McBain, and Miss McBain worked at the school from 1936 until she retired in 1954. Miss McBain was replaced by Miss Stark, who I had for most of the time here. She taught myself and my contemporaries, and she was a former infant mistress from Haddington in East Lothian, and I believe that when she retired she returned there. By general consensus, she was a kind and conscientious teacher. She firmly believed in equality of the sexes, and I think she was a bit shocked at first by the bunch of young savages that she had inherited. I can recall that during the first playtime break we had with her, the boys had all stampeded out of the door as they usually did, while the girls stood back against the wall to avoid being trampled underfoot. And it was a similar procedure when we were called in, with the girls standing aside to let the boys rush past into the classroom. And she quickly put us right, of course, and she impressed upon us from that point on that we had to let the girls file in quietly in and out in front of us before we meekly trotted in behind. Our attempts at emasculation didn't end there, and there's an entry in the logbook for October 1956, which I can recall well, where she notes that the older boys had hand knitted a blanket for a mission hospital in India, and this consisted of multiple woolen squares which, if the truth were known, had mostly been completed secretly at home by our mothers. Our contemporaries at the nearby Blair Athol School were greatly amused when they learned that we were engaged in such girly activities. It was a bit embarrassing, we felt, at the time. Miss Stark retired in 1961 and was followed by Miss Morag McMartin, and for a short time by Hazel Barber. And the last teacher to teach at the school was Mrs. Robertson, Rhoda Robertson, and she continued to live in the schoolhouse after the school closed in 1992, and her family still live there. The final years of the school. Killiecrankie School finally closed its doors in June 1992 at the start of the summer holidays that year, after having served the community continuously for exactly 155 years. By this time, myself and most of my contemporaries had long departed the area. However, it's fitting that today we have Duncan Scrimgeour and Murray Scrimgeour and Ben Scrimgeour, who are the third generation of the Scrimgeour family to have attended the school, and who can provide us with the details for the final chapter in the story of this remarkable little Highland Perthshire village school. Chatting away about your time at the school.
Yeah. So I would be there from 60 till 67. I'll be about right. 60 to 67. That was really Miss Stark for the start, and then Morag for the last year and a half, and Hazel Barber taught for the first part of primary 6. If you were naughty, you get stuck in the wee seat at this front. I remember that. You get put round with the little ones if you did anything out of order. I can't remember. She just went round everybody, I think. And she'd give projects or something for somebody to do, and then come back to you. Once, give you half an hour, and then come back to each group. I think that's the way she did it. What happened in Killie School, we struck up a friendship, and it was to teach us letter writing. A guy from Cork in Ireland wrote to the school and said, he read somewhere in a Scottish book about the Tawes, and he wanted to know what the Tawes was,
Right.
which is the strap, another name for belt.
Uh-huh.
So that started a correspondence with, and Morag encouraged every pupil to write to
Yeah.
Mr. Cusack. We all did, and we all learned how to write letters.
Uh-huh.
And he visited a couple of times. He was smashing bloke. And we got a lot out of that. You know, we got actually proper letter writing.
Yeah, there'd be educational too, learning how the
So
other
it's, what's his
people-
name? Radio programmes for the
Yeah.
schools.
Yeah.
And we'll learn other songs. The schools put out the booklets for that year, and you'd learn like minstrel songs, you know, from America, like Deep South. There was one, various, I can't remember too many Scottish ones, but we got invited to Morag's house to meet Hamish Henderson, and I just over my head who Hamish Henderson was, and he sang these little songs with us. And it was later on when I learnt the history of Hamish Henderson, I realised that's who it was, that he was quite famous. Another one that transformed the school from, because he was from town, and we were all real country bumpkins. And Derek had all sorts of marvellous things like Airfix, for example,
Oh, right.
and toys that we didn't have, and he was great. Derek was a great guy. When we were littler, it was like Tig, Jane Tig, and Statue Tig, hide and seek. Oh, there was a sand pit as well.
Yeah.
So we were allowed to take our cars to the toys to the sand pit. I must admit, when Derek Dewar came, we started playing football a lot. Derek was a great footballer, and we played a lot of football. That's from about primary 5 onwards, all we did was play football. I mean, there was a school picnic every year. You'd get the lawns at Strathcarry or the lawns at Urrard, alternately years, and you just played sports, racing, sack race, all that stuff. And there are really 30, 40 people at these picnics.
Pleased to meet you.
How
you doing?
Yeah, good to see you.
Alright. Were you there the full, did you do your primary?
I did the full 7 years here between
Oh, wow.
1952 and 1959. The missing piece of the jigsaw is the final years of the school.
It was brilliant, really. It was a great school, and I got to do the last year of my primary. You know, when Ben left, he's a year above me, when he left it went down to 4 pupils.
Sure, yeah.
And that was when it closed. So I did the last year of my primary at Lochgelly, and you know, so I could really see the difference between the two schools, and it was a different movie. Kelly, you just, you know, you learned so much more, and I really enjoyed that. I felt it was a lot more flexible. You got to do more things. You were more involved, and obviously you had more sort of teacher time, because you know I went to a class of 30 in Pitlochry, and Pitlochry wasn't a bad school by any means, but just it was a sharp contrast in the quality.
I think the thing about one teacher schools is if you've got a good teacher at a one teacher school, you've got a good teacher for 7 years. If you got a bad teacher, you got a bad teacher.
Well, that's right, and I think was it Miss McMartin was before Mrs. Robertson?
Yeah.
And I think she was, I mean, that was 2 in a row that just got, as far as I'm aware, got one of the things at Killie Primary that I always thought were brilliant, and everyone seemed to buy into, the whole community as well, was the plays.
Oh yeah.
And we'd always do a big school play, and you know, for 2 weeks we'd really, you know, I'm not sure what happened to Curiculum, but it was all to do with the play, making the scenery, you know, doing the costumes, and Mrs. Robertson as well would give you change the sort of script you would get, and you know, you'd ad-lib it, and of course on the night itself it was much, I realise now when I look back at the video, it was much hilarity, and I can see why, but it was a really enjoyable thing. And then you know, so in our last year we only had 5 pupils, so we did a play about the Amazon. I think I had 7 parts, you know, to make and everyone else was the same, you know. It was, but you know, it was a great laugh.
Well, you could have had a career in that.
Well, do you know, I went to Pitlochry the next year, and they were doing the same play.
Okay.
And in Pitlochry I was a villager.
Okay, right.
I just stood there and did nothing. So it kind of shows you a little bit the difference.
Yeah.
The older generations were a lot more daring than us, because you know, we would, for us, out of bounds was the sort of wrecked old fence down the back, the path, and we would sort of scamper maybe 100 metres over it now and again. But I mean, he was down in the railway tunnel. You know?
He was just down the walk through the tunnel.
We were feeling daring being just over the fence. I was saying that to Jimmy, that with Mr. Robertson, that it was, you know, everyone was the same. That was, I don't know if that's like Drummer and staff, but everybody was treated the same, was expected the same behaviour, and she was always very even
Yeah.
like that. And you know, you wouldn't get away with any nonsense. But,
I think we also
it was
got.
good fun, you know.
Yeah.
So it was good, you know.
Did we not get? We got sometimes an art teacher would come in once a month.
PE teacher, that was.
Yeah.
She would come in once a week, and we would have a music teacher who was, in the end, it was Mrs. Sims.
Mm-hmm.
She was married to the chemist.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Moore, sorry, was the music teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Good memories. Of
Yeah,
Kelly.
so is there any discipline at all? They've
Well-
done away with the belt by your
Nah, I mean, you'd get a tan off, but that was about it.
Uh-huh.
In the final years of the school, there was a sadness that it was closing, but I think even as a wee,
It was
you know, primary
inevitable.
6, I could see for myself that on the odd year, you'd be like, oh, there'll be 12 kids this year, there'll be 6 this year, but there's not the level. It's just, you know, it's a shame, I suppose, in a lot of ways, because, you know, like I say, it was a really high standard education. When I first went, I can just remember that some kids would get like a meal provided by the school, but it was up to you. But we always had packed lunches.
Nice.
And then by the time I was primary 4, they stopped the packed lunch every day. That was it, really.
Uh-huh.
We would play high tag a lot. High tag was, you know, benches all the way around the porta cabin, and if you're high up, couldn't be tagged. Basically, someone in the middle. And you'd all be run about, you know, just winding them up basically until you inevitably got tagged. And another one, an absolute belter of a game that we came up with ourselves was because there was a basketball hoop on the shed, so we came up with, we invented our own game which was rug net, which was like a combination of basketball and rugby. But you know, Mrs. Robinson, it was one of the few games she actually banned because, as you can imagine, obviously going up for the, you know, spear tackle, brutal. But that was why we loved it. It was brilliant, you know. Just pretty much a free for all, really. It was just who was brave enough to try and get the ball through the net, and then you would just open. But it got banned because, as you can imagine, it was horrendous injuries, but a great sport.
Fantastic.
Not long before the closure of the school, Perth and Kinross Council installed goalposts for the first time in the playground here, and they provided a new television set and radio, and then promptly closed the school down. So that concludes the presentation. Thanks very much for your patience and understanding while we got through all that. So on behalf of soldiers of Killiecrankie, I would like to conclude by thanking all the people who have helped out with the presentation by providing information, anecdotes, photographs, materials and access to properties. And the list includes, but may not be limited to, in alphabetical order, Athol Country Life Museum, Margaret Cairney, the Scrimgeour family, Elizabeth Ryan, the National Archives of Scotland, and the Robertson family of the old schoolhouse Killiecrankie, and the family of the last teacher at the school, Rhoda Robertson, and Sandra Parkinson. And not least, of course, James Rattery, who's been our cameraman. I wish they'd let us into the Keybell Library, because all the answers will be in there, but they've got this 100-year rule.